So yes, this is our final talk on the White Lotus Sutra. And this, I think of this, and many people think of this as the climax of the whole sutra. Yeah, the sutra is mainly this incredible cosmic gathering on Vulture's Peak, which is supposed to be the intersection between heaven and earth, the highest place on the earth and the lowest part of heaven, where the Buddha is teaching. And mostly what happens during the sutra are these incredible parables that you've heard some of, or if not all of. I've been looking at these parables for, 40 years, something like that, and I keep on discovering more about them. They're clearly works of profound spiritual genius, yeah? These parables. You can come back to them again and again and again. And when I was thinking about tonight, and the story of tonight, it's not really a parable, it's kind of the climax of the sutra, at least that's one way of looking at it. You could think of the parables as saying how you practice the Dharma, and this evening is why you practice the Dharma. Yeah? You could think of the parables as the path of Buddhism, and you could think of tonight, as the goal of Buddhism, which is, of course, impossible to put into words. So, for instance, we had the parable of the burning house, that we need to get to grips with our existential situation, which is that we are going to die, and that everyone that we love will die, and that we need to escape the world. That's one parable, but put very briefly. Another parable is the parable of the return journey, and that's partly a parable about how to grow as a human being. You need to take responsibility for your life in ever-deepening ways, and that's symbolized by the moving of this huge pile of muck. You need to sort of purify yourself, confess your faults, admit to your shortcomings, work to change yourself in accordance with the Buddha Dharma. Yeah? So that wonderful parable of the return journey is a parable about how you change. Yeah? And then the other parable is about the rain cloud, how you change is that you need to grow, that the whole great matter of the Dharma is growing and flourishing. And what's mysterious about that, and when I was talking to Maitreyabandhu about it just the other day, I was really struck again by it's actually more mystical than it sounds, because the great matter of the Dharma life and the human life is growth, but it's growth along a certain pattern. It's growing in accordance with your nature, that even Buddhas are very different natures. You don't become more and more alike as you grow, you become more and more distinct. And yet at the same time there is this one rain. So you've got this incredible parable of one Dharma, and through that one Dharma people become more and more distinctly themselves. And I think one way of approaching that might be that negative emotion is very common. Like, it's interesting, isn't it, how many words we have for negative emotions. Like we have hatred, resentment, aggression, passive aggression, vainglory, self-righteousness. We've got lots of words for, aggression and hatred and so forth, but very few words for love. And that's because love and generosity and those positive qualities, they cohere the psyche, whereas negative emotions split the psyche up into bits, break the psyche up. So you can be feeling resentful, or you can be feeling indignant, or you can be feeling rageful, all quite distinct mental events. Yeah. So it's as if, as Maitreyabandhu beautifully put it, as the light of positive emotion shines through you, your pattern, which is quite mysterious what that means, your sort of structure as a person, and Bhante said once that it's the contents of your mind that changes, not the structure, which I think is very profound, and I'm still thinking about that. I heard it many, many years ago, that it's as if you have a kind of shape, kind of structure, a kind of patterning, and as the light of positive emotion shines through that, you actually look more and more different, not more and more the same. Yeah. So that was, again, this is how you grow. You grow by opening yourself to the Dharma, not holding up an umbrella, and you grow in a very particular way that's unique to yourself, at least generally speaking. And then last night we heard about you grow by trying to realize eventually that you're not poor, even though you feel poor, that your life has been led in poverty, and that you have on your person a priceless jewel. And what I find very mysterious about that metaphor, as so often with parables and metaphors and images, they're much more accurate than abstract speech. So that jewel in your cloak or your coat or whatever it is right next to you. So it's here all the time is the metaphor. It both belongs to you because it was given to you, you didn't know, but because it was given to you, it sort of doesn't. So that the parable is trying to say, you could say it does, but you could also say it doesn't. In other words, you could say it's your potential, or you could say it's the Buddha. You can't. It's trying to get you not to settle down on one side of that thought, And that's what parables can do. They can tell you contrasting and even contradictory things at the same time, and that's why they keep deepening. Because as you practice, the parable kind of deepens with you, and you see more of yourself in the parable as you go through. Yeah? So they're all how you practice the Dharma life. And I really hope that we've managed to communicate a little bit of that. There's so much to communicate about that, but they communicate how you practice the Dharma life. Tonight I want to try and talk about why you practice the Dharma life. It's much more difficult to talk about. So we're moving from the path to the goal. And in the sutra, it's quite clearly climactic. It's a visionary experience that we get to in the context of many other visionary experiences. And the part I'm going to focus on only a small part of this story because it's so involved and I don't really still understand all of its meanings. I read it again and I think, yes, that's definitely very important, but I haven't really yet understood that. After however many years, I still haven't. And that's wonderful, I think. So what I'm going to be another way of saying what I'm going to try and talk about tonight is the sacred, even the sacred realm. Now, this isn't a language that Buddhism tends to use, but it's a language that I've come to find more and more significant, is a sacred world. I think what we miss most in our modern world is a sense of direct contact with the sacred. My own feeling increasingly is that we're so dazzled by what we have in modernity, from iPhones to holidays in Barbados to the World Wide Web. We're so dazzled by all that, and we really benefit from all that. But because we're so dazzled by that, we don't notice what we're missing. And I think one of the most important things we're missing is a sense of the sacred. So tonight I want to try and talk about the sacred and how everything depends on a sense of the sacred, and what we've lost in modern life since the death of God in 1883, whenever it was that Nietzsche said belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, was how he put it, which is a wonderful way of putting it. Belief in a Christian God has become unbelievable. In other words, even if you try to believe it, you can't really. The metaphor is broken. It was getting at something, even getting at something very profound at its deepest, but the metaphor doesn't work in modern life. So when I say the sacred, what I primarily mean by the sacred, and I think this is actually what all religious traditions mean by the sacred, is that which cannot be spoken about, that which cannot be captured in words, that which cannot be argued for or argued against. Yeah? It's the noumenal world, the world that you cannot pin down and mustn't even try to pin down. Even the attempt to try and pin it down is a mistake. And you can see that what happens with metaphysics, if you're not careful, including Buddhist metaphysics, they get very complex, trying to pin down the nature of things. But the sacred is always, by definition, beyond words. That's why it's sacred. That's what it means, the sacred. That you can't say it. You can't reliably say it and other people understand it. You can say the sacred, but you can't know that people understand it, basically, is a more correct way of saying it. So because it can never be captured in words, it can never be commodified. Yeah? We're living in a world primarily of commodification. Even our emotions are now commodified. We sell ourselves every day on Instagram. We turn things into a sort of Instagrammable TikTok video, we're commodifying our very souls if we're not careful. And the sacred is that which cannot be commodified, can never be, and should never be bought or sold. It's quite appalling when you see Buddhist teachers teaching the Dharma for money. That's utterly un-Buddhist, because you're then turning the sacred into a commodity and therefore destroying it. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about tonight. Perfectly straightforward. A sense of the sacred. But I thought the sacred of it's very cravatty, isn't it? You sort of immediately feel you're smoking a pipe when you're talking about these things. So I thought we'd start literally at the other end, and I thought I'd tell you a story. This is slightly shocking. Don't be alarmed. There should be a trigger warning. I thought I'd tell you a story about my colonoscopy. Does everyone know what a colonoscopy is? Because I don't want to have to explain it to you people. But before we even get to this sacred event in the White Lotus Sutra, I thought I would literally start at the other end. I didn't realize how funny that is. Yeah, so I'll take you through my colonoscopy. Don't worry, you're quite safe. There are no children here. So yeah, I went. I'm of a certain age, and I've got all these various chronic health problems, which I won't bore you about because they're so boring. And older people, if they're not careful, just end up complaining about their health. Anyway, I had to go and have this colonoscopy. And I arrived for this colonoscopy, not massively looking forward to it. I mean, I don't get out much, but still, there's Netflix, isn't there? I got there, and I was actually in a weirdly good mood. I had to drink this horrible laxative stuff that was disgusting. Anyway, I waited for my colonoscopy, and they give you this funny gown that opens in the obvious places. It's too tragic for words. And I was wheeled into this the colonoscopy unit, and there was this very nice doctor, and there's quite a lot of people around. You're thinking, how many people need to see this? And the nurse is holding this long piece of tubing, which she's clearly trying to hide behind her back. You held it like this, and I'm thinking, how much of it is behind you? I can see what you're doing. How far is this going to go? That's where I was with this. Anyway, you lie on this rather unpleasant trolley, and it's quite slightly, even at times, very uncomfortable procedure. And as they turn the corners of the colon, it gets quite uncomfortable because the scope hits the colon and has to turn, so it's quite uncomfortable. So there I was, lying on my side, having this colonoscopy, and they show you the screen, which is nice. I've watched better films, but it's slightly like the start of Doctor Who. That's what you do. But there was no doctor, there was no spinning TARDIS, which is just as well, probably. Anyway, you're watching. You're watching basically your colon, yeah. And you think, oh my God, I'd recognise it anywhere. Oh my God, that's like so me, that colon. I could, oh my God, like a gay colon. I tried not to make these jokes to the doctors on this. So I was watching my colon on this screen. It wasn't massively interesting. And whilst I was having that, I was doing my sadhana. So I lay on my side, and I basically was practicing my sadhana. So ever since I was ordained, which is 35 years ago, I took up the sadhana of Padmasambhava. And so pretty much most days, every day, most days at least, I worship Padmasambhava. I do a particular dramatic sadhana, which is a kind of particular meditation practice that you're given when you're ordained. And I was doing my sadhana whilst I was in such a good mood. And And in the sadhana, various things happen. You get sort of blessings from the guru. The kind of metaphysics of sadhana is that you visualize the goal of the Dharma life, the Buddha, or in my case, Padmasambhava, and effectively they bless you in various ways. And interesting, the word for blessing is adhisthana, which is the name of this retreat center that Bhante gave it. You receive the adhisthana from the Buddhas, usually in the form of lights and mantras and so on. So I was doing this whilst I was in my colonoscopy. And it was I found it a very interesting experience because it felt like a kind of real metaphysical experience. I know that sounds a bit grand, but I was doing my sadhana, so there I was, 31 years later, visualizing the Padmasambhava and his blessings falling upon me. And I was watching a screen with my colon. It was very, very uncomfortable at times. Yeah, and the hard metal of the bed, everything in these places. A hospital, everything seems plastic or metal. It's such an inhuman environment. Everyone's got whatever's on and scrubs on and so on. So it's a very, very inhuman environment. It's very kind of matter. It's a sort of pure matter. Chrome and metal and plastic and recording your temperature and so on. But I was doing my sadhana, and I've never experienced in all my life how radical the difference is between matter and mind. Yeah. So there I am, to the doctors and nurses, just another older man with a colon like everybody else's colon. Just matter. Like, from what I was seeing on the screen, there was no sense of it being me at all, obviously. I was making a joke of it, but there's absolutely no sense of it. It seems impersonal, and there's even no relationship of the pain that I was experiencing in the picture. So, they said, we're about to turn the corner of the colon, so it'll be a bit uncomfortable, and it really was, but you couldn't see that. Yeah. Meanwhile, I've got these lights of my sadhana coming down and blessing me. And I really felt very moved by my sadhana in that instance. I hope I'll do my sadhana when I die. I felt very moved by it. So I had this very strong experience of mind being utterly different from body and matter. I had my body, which is in no valuable sense my body. I didn't make my colon. And even things like the pain I was experiencing, you can't see that. And even if you looked at the neural pathways, you could do all that. You could see all these neurons firing and everything, but it would give you no sense of what pain is. If an alien came down and said, "Let's have a look at all the X-rays and the CAT scans and the scope. Where is there pain?" You couldn't find pain. You can find you can find chemical changes. You couldn't find pain. You certainly couldn't find. There would be no way of finding me doing my sadhana, even if you sort of looked at the nerve endings and the nerval patterns and the electromagnetic activity in my brain. You wouldn't see Padmasambhava. In fact, you would never see anyone's thought. Like the thoughts you're having in your head, no one has ever seen them. All they see is patternings of neural transmitters. No one's ever seen a thought in someone's head. Consciousness, in that moment, seemed to me to be utterly distinct from matter, to the point which they didn't seem to have hardly anything to do with each other. There was my body, there was the room full of plastic and metal and this inhuman environment. There was my sadhana and my mind and pain and my life, my childhood, all that has brought me to be. And the two things seemed utterly different. Yeah? An unbridgeable duality. Yeah? So I wanted to start with that because that is where we start, with this duality between mind and matter, between consciousness. And remember, we use that word consciousness, but most of the mind isn't conscious. They think that the sort of self-conscious element of your mind, the purposive self-conscious element of your mind is about 7% of consciousness. Even when you make breakfast, you don't use your consciousness very much. When you drive a car in heavy traffic, you don't use your self-consciousness very much. You can still chat to a friend or listen to music and actually hardly notice that you're traveling. So most of what we call consciousness isn't conscious. But you, in that experience, I don't know whether I've managed to get across, but it seemed to me an utter duality between mind on one hand, me doing my sadhana and even the pain and the feelings I was having, and this operation on my body, this procedure on my body, and the world that procedure was taking place in seemed unbridgeably different. Yeah, and that's true if you look at it philosophically. You know, the great problem is still the hard problem of consciousness, as it's called. And there's more and more contemporary thinkers who are thinking about that. Of course, Buddhism's not so interested in thinking about that. It's interested in actually experiencing the nature of things, which is through practice, not mainly through philosophy. Anyway, that's my little overture in a way. I wanted to start with this incredible bifurcation that you experience directly between your mind and your body, between the world and self. Yeah? And they seem to have nothing to do with each other in that moment. So I'll come back to that, I think. I might hopefully come back to that in the end. So now I need to, that's starting at one end, I need to tell you what happens in the sutra. So basically what happens in the sutra, suddenly, after these parables are told, this vast stupa arises from the earth. Yeah. And I really find the shrine very beautiful. This image of it's not actually a stupa, but it's a stupa-like form. This vast stupa appears from the earth. Yeah, and for those of you old enough, it always reminds me when you read the sutra of the end of Close Encounters in the Third Kind. Do you remember that? Does anyone remember that first version? Anyway, and it was when special effects had only just come in. And you see this incredible spaceship suddenly arrive above this mountain. And that's a trivialized version of it, but it's the same sense of just when you thought you were in this massive world of Buddhas and gods and universes, suddenly this vast stupa, like a vast, beautiful alien and benign spacecraft appears out of the earth, just arises out of the earth. And the description of it is exquisite, with all these bells and flags and all these adornments, but this vast stupa. Yeah. So you have to imagine this whole sutra is going on this one plane of the Buddha teaching on Vulture's Peak, and suddenly this vast New York-sized stupa arises, glittering and beautiful and so on. Yeah. And the stupa rises into the air, and it stays in the middle of air, and then you hear this voice booming from within the stupa, praising the White Lotus Sutra and praising the Buddha Shakyamuni, saying, "Excellent, excellent. The White Lotus Sutra has been proclaimed." There's a slight comic feeling because sometimes you think, but hang on, they've been saying right from the start, he's about to teach the White Lotus Sutra. He's going to teach the White Lotus Sutra. He's going to teach the White Lotus Sutra. Then it says, "It's been done." You think, did I miss it? Yeah. There's something in that I think we need to think about. But anyway, it appears, and you get this voice from inside the stupa saying, "Excellent, excellent. Everything that the Buddha has said is true." Yeah. This voice confirms what the Buddha has said. And then one of the assembly says, that you always get these lovely exchanges where one of the assembly says to the Buddha, what's happening here? And the Buddha explains. I won't go through the explanation because it's quite long. But basically, everyone wants to. He basically says that in this stupa there is this Buddha called what's his name? Infinite treasure? No, what is it? Abundant treasures. That's right. But it is this Buddha called Abundant Treasures. It is residing in this stupa. That's where the voice is coming from. And everyone says, we want to see this Buddha. Yeah. So what Shakyamuni Buddha does is he immediately rises up into the air, goes straight up into the air, and he goes up to the doorway of the stupa and he unbolts the door of the stupa. And in the sutra, there's this unbolting is like this huge thunder, just unbolting this stupa, which is interesting again, this thunderous sound of this bolt going back and the door opening. And there inside the stupa is this radiant Buddha, abundant treasures. Yeah. And he's sitting on a lion throne, on a throne, sitting cross-legged on a throne. And then what happened, I mean, I'll tell it very, very briefly, and then I'll explore each image. I haven't got too much time. He's sitting on this throne. Shakyamuni opens the door, and Shakyamuni basically goes and sits with abundant treasures on that throne. They share the same lion throne. So suddenly you've got Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, the Buddha of this time. Remember, the Buddha was born as we are born. The historical Buddha sitting next to this Buddha of abundant treasures. Yeah, I'll come to the last image of that near the end of the talk. But that's where I want to leave us for now. That's basically what happens. Lots more that happens than that, but that's probably enough. So just to say first about the stupa, or the significance of the stupa, I can only need to say it briefly because it's very complex, the significance of a stupa. If you ever go to our retreat centre, the LBC's retreat centre at Vajrasana, we've got a large stupa in the stupa courtyard there. You'll see stupas all over the Buddhist world. Yeah, they often contain the relics of a famous or a disciple and so on. And basically, the stupa to put it very simply, the stupa represents everything. Yeah. So the stupa is divided into sections. So the first section, the bottom section, represents earth, the earth element. Yeah. Solidity itself. And it's very mystical how it talks about this, and I'll say something about that in a minute. But you start with earth. That, in other words, all of life has a solid aspect. This lectern, my body, these glasses, you have solidity. That's everywhere, yeah? The earth element. And there's the earth element in me, my bones, my colon and so on. And there's the earth element out there, the trees and so on, yeah? The water, not the water, the bed that the water rushes down. Then the next element is water. So there's the water element in the universe. There's the water in me as I drink my glass of water. And there's the water coming down from the clouds in rain. There's water in the pond outside. It's the same water element. There's water in me. There's water out there. And they're constantly being exchanged. And there's earth in me, and there's earth out there, and they're constantly being exchanged. You can't say where the earth element out there stops and the earth element in here begins, and same with water. Yeah. So you have earth, water, fire or temperature, so the fire element. In other words, that there is temperature, heat. Yeah, the heat from the heaters that we've got on just now, the heat of your bed when you get up in the morning, your bed's still warm, the heat of your body, and how you need to regulate your heat, and again, the heat element in the world is inseparable from the heat element inside. If you were to reflect on it deeply enough, you wouldn't be able to see where the heat element ends outside and where it begins inside. There's a constant exchange, isn't there? If I get cold, I put on a jumper. If I get hot, I take it off. There's a constant exchange of the heat element. Yeah. And then you've got the air element, the element air. So that's, in breezes, in wind, and so on, but also in the breath of the body. And that's even more subtly, every moment constantly being exchanged. The air element out there is becoming the air element in here, and so forth. And that's a constant, never-changing pattern. It's not my breath, it's not my body, it's not my water element, my urine or so forth. It's this water element that's running through us. We're like a kind of conduit in which all the elements pass through and pass out. Yeah. So you have the air element, then you have the space element, the element that everything sort of resides within the space of my own body and the space of the world. So everything is extended in space. Yeah? And then finally you have the consciousness element, which, if you go back to that little story of my colonoscopy, can feel completely separate. Sometimes it's pictured as a little spark on top of the stupa. Yeah? This mysterious spark of consciousness that's got involved with all these other elements, with the earth, the water, the fire, and the air. Yeah? That somehow made bits of it me and bits of it not me. Do you see what I mean? That consciousness has got wrapped around those elements and said, this bit of that element is me, that bit of the element is not me. Yeah? And Buddhism would say, that's a creation, you're doing that. You can't find that, you're applying that to experience, but you can't actually find it. It's something you put on top of experience, albeit at the deepest level. Yeah? So do you see that the stupa represents everything you could imagine? All of those elements, inside and outside. Yeah? So the stupa comes to represent everything. And interestingly, the elements, the great elements, however many there are. How many are there? Anyway, no, 6, thank you. Numbers are very weak for me, I'm afraid. The elements are thought to be mahabhutas, which means great ghosts. Yeah? So it's not saying anything metaphysical about the earth element. It's not saying there is such a thing as matter. I mean, matter, the idea of matter, is itself an incredible abstraction. You can never find matter. It's weird. We all believe in it, but it's an incredible level of abstraction. We have this idea of these little bouncing billiard balls or something at a microscopic level, but it's a complete abstraction. So Buddhism isn't saying there is earth inside and out. It's saying that's how it seems, that there is resistance inside the body and outside the body. There is this wateriness, but they're great ghosts. So they're not finally real. And you see why I've then talked about this colonoscopy, because somehow it's trying to say that sense you have of the absolute distinction between mind and body, matter and consciousness, is not real, it's not there. Now, I don't get that at all, but that's what Buddhism's saying. Yeah? So the stupa, therefore, is everything, the whole phenomenal world, including your own consciousness and including mountains and rivers and the rivers within you and the rivers without you. Yeah? And the two Buddhas, well, for me, they're just like incredible, this appearance of abundant treasures. The simple way it's not simple, but the way I want to think about it, and I try to keep circling this because it's quite difficult to think about, is that the Buddha, Shakyamuni, represents relative reality. He represents Buddhahood in human form as a relative reality. It's not quite that, but let's leave it at that for now. And abundant treasures represents absolute reality, non-dual awareness, absolute reality. Yeah. And it seemed to me when I was reflecting on this that there's a prefiguration of this at every level of our experience. There's a relative, here's the things that are relatively true, and then there's a sort of absolute. Buddhism doesn't like to use the language of absolutes because it's really theistic, but it means it's a placeholder word, really. Don't take it too literally. So, for instance, I was thinking, I had various examples, but I'll cut one out. But I was thinking, for instance, about death. I think about my mother's death, which was 3 years ago. When she died, you know what it's like when someone dies. You suddenly have all these things to do. There are, you have to call the doctor. We had to get the undertakers. They were going to come the next morning. There's all this jobs at the relative level that you do have to do, and it's quite often very involved. We then had to clear out, eventually clear out the house, and that took a long time, and then we had to sell the house, and all that's very painful in a way. But there's lots of stuff on the simple everyday day level that you need to do. You need to organise the funeral. You need to know where the funeral is. And one of the tragedies now about funerals is there's no accepted form. So all of my family had different ideas about what the funeral should be. Originally, I was going to lead the funeral, and then my brother changed all of our mind behind my back and did it another way. Had the vicar do it, anyway, let's not go there. Because there's no established form. So before you know it, everyone's falling out over the funeral. All these actually positively tragic things. There's no actual accepted form anymore. So you have to make it up, and then what to wear, where to do it, do you have music, etc. It all gets really, really silly. But also, you see, when someone dies, of course, you haven't just got those relative and practical matters. You've got the great matter of death. The, as it were, absolute matter of death, the sacred, transcendent matter of death, which seems to have nothing to do, does it, with organising the funeral. I remember opening her cupboards, thinking, what am I going to do? All these clothes, nobody wants these clothes. But they all still smell of my mother, my mother's in everything. And when do you even do that, clearing out stuff, nobody wants, my mother, had this furniture. Nobody wants that old-fashioned, dark, big furniture anymore, crammed into a tiny bungalow. And we had to get somebody in and just say, well, I'll give you 20 quid for the whole lot, Things that had been precious family things that just were like, well, 20 quid, how about? And we'll chuck it for you, All of those seem to have almost no bearing at all on the great matter of that, in this case, my mother has died or someone has died. And I don't know what that is. You don't know what that is, you really don't, and I don't know what that is. Actually, I had a very strong instinct that I said, as soon as my mother died, I said, okay, look, that was horrible, that bit. Her death was really awful. You've done that. That was really horrible. It was like, I had this almost vision that death is like a crawl space that you have to crawl through, like the crawl space you come through. You have to go through this tiny tunnel. So you have to get thinner and thinner, because my poor old mother, you couldn't imagine losing any more weight. It was almost like she was going down to skin and bone so she could get through this tiny crawl space. And I said, okay, look, you've gone through that now. I was saying this out loud with my family around me. So you've gone through that now. You can now go. You'll be fine now. You're completely fine. I had a very strong instinct that my father had come to help her. She took a long time to die, and she died on the anniversary of my father's death, 27 years before. It was a weird experience, because I was thinking, this is all very familiar. And she literally died on the same day as my father 27 years before. Anyway, I got a bit distracted by that. But you see how you've got the relative matters that all need to be done well. And if you don't do them well, it can cause all these family problems. And I'm seeing that more and more around me, because now people are actually leaving money. In my parents' generation, nobody had any money, so there wasn't family problems like that. If you don't get all those matters done, if she hadn't done a will, if you hadn't done it well enough, you cause all this pain. Yeah? That's a real thing. Those relative realities are real, and you need to attend to them. I do, and you do. And yet, there is something else, isn't there? The matter of death itself, and the matter of your mother's death, or your parents' death, or your lover's death, or your child's death, which the enormity of which seems to have nothing to do with the matters in hand. There's this strange disjunct. One of the great values of ritual is to give you a form in which to express that other, most important thing. And we're, in the modern westernized world, we are losing, and have even probably most of us lost that form. So do you see, there's a sort of relative and absolute. There's all the things I need to do now my mother has died, and if I don't do them well, like if I don't communicate with all my nephews and nieces well, I could make things worse. If I don't act well, I can make things worse. And then there's the enormity of death itself, and the sacredness of death itself, which needs as it were, a wholly different response. So I remember I said to my brothers, we need candles. And my oldest brother, I've got three older brothers and a younger sister, I said, we need candles. Luckily, it was so lucky, every one of her siblings had been there that day. I had just changed her hot water bottle just moments before she died. But I said, we need candles. And my oldest brother is very funny, he's a sort of farmer. He said, what for? Like, I don't, we've got lights, what? I said, like, duh, we need candles. So, as soon as I could, I made a shrine and lit candles. And even my brothers were very touched by that, but they had no conception of doing that. I was so struck by that. So we have, as it were, this sort of relative matter. I don't know whether I'm quite getting this across, but I hope so. And this, as it were, absolute matter. Don't worry too much about the words, but death does seem kind of absolute. Actually, I think birth does as well. When Alex was put into my arms, when the day she was born, it was as mysterious and magical as death. Suddenly this creature had come from I don't know where. She looked at me with these great big blue eyes, and she had these long, long fingers. Anyway, she'd be horrified to know that I was talking about something. Anyway, she won't be watching the video because she's on TikTok. When I say I'm going to give a talk, she says, that sounds boring. But what I'm trying to say is that this matter of the Shakyamuni Buddha sitting next to the Buddha of abundant treasures seems to me to be one way of saying there's a way in which relative reality and absolute reality can sit on the same throne. Yeah, I'll come back to that again in a minute, try and get into that. Another just experience from my own life about this, relative and as it were absolute. I'm using these terms very poetically, I think, as I go along. But it was a meditation experience I had on, I think, the last retreat I was on. As I kind of mentioned, I have lots of physical discomfort, so when I'm meditating, I'm often having to manage quite a lot of discomfort, and I often don't sleep and so on. But what I was trying to do in this particular meditation, and I can only tell retrospectively that it was a bit visionary because I couldn't bring it back. I thought it was just quite straightforward at the time. This is what you might find in meditation. You think, oh yeah, no, that's just, yeah, that was fine. But then later you think, okay, let's just do that again. And you realise, oh, it's not there. I can't actually do that. It was a gift. But at the time, it feels so natural, it's so you, that you just think, oh, I'll do that again. Boom, no, boom, and it doesn't happen, Anyway, I had one of those experiences where I've been reflecting. I'm going to go on a bit longer, is that all right? I've been reflecting. Surprise. I've been reflecting, I'm afraid, once again, on my own childhood. Bhante once said he didn't like my poems, and I think it was because I keep talking about my childhood in them. Anyway, but I had a very unhappy childhood. I've actually had a much better childhood than many, many people I know, so I don't quite understand why it was so painful for me. I was very, very unhappy, and that unhappy childhood persisted well into my 20s, when people like David Mitra were very, very kind to me. But I came to the Dharma very, very unhappy. I think my first time I'd felt sort of suicidal was when I was 13, something like that. So I've been very, very unhappy, and I've always struggled with that dreadful self-esteem problem, which is just as likely to make you show off as it is to feel sorry for yourself. It's just as likely to make you overwork and be weirdly driven and ambitious as to feel depressed. It's a much more complex phenomenon than our pop psychology will allow for. But anyway, I'd got this sort of, I've been for many, many years, I'm 64 now, for heaven's sake, I should have left this behind years ago. But I've been reflecting on that. And in meditation this one time, I was trying to understand it more, because it was very, very painful. And it's nobody's fault. It's not my parents' fault. It's not my brother's fault. It's not my sister. It's nobody's fault. It's nobody's fault, actually. Nothing is anybody's fault. We're all just sort of blown around by the winds of history and culture. And I seemed to see, it was like I could see my consciousness arising moment by moment. It can't quite have been like that, but I seemed to have a sort of vision of my consciousness arising moment by moment. And it was like a habit was just being passed on from one chain to the next. And that habit was something like, that's not quite good enough. That's not, I've tried that, it doesn't really work. A sort of slightly fatalistic habit. But at a very low level, a very quiet, self-defeating, fatalist, not good enough kind of habit. It's not a conscious habit that I have. It's not what I mean to do. But I could sort of see it like arising in each moment for a moment. And every time I saw that it was arising in each moment, I had this exquisite moment, micro moment of peace. As soon as I could see that it was just a habit. And remember that habits aren't deep. They're just, deep is like the ocean still. People often say, I've got deep samskaras or deep habits. That's actually not true. Habits are what run on the surface. So that habit of self-dislike and an ongoing sense of inadequacy, which I've had all of my life, really, and feeling threatened and put upon and so on, which isn't anywhere near true. I could see it, just a habit, that in each moment of consciousness, somehow it would like spring across and just form itself again. And every time I could see it for what it was like it dissolved, and I had this moment of exquisite, like quite exquisite peace. And then as soon as I noticed that, I'd be back into that habit. Oh, I've lost it now. I'm not very good at this. And I just go back into that. I told you I can't meditate. I've been trying to work with that for so long, but again, just see how in that is this relative and absolute matter. So that habit I've got, which is a habit, it's not a reality. It's not that my past is here now, but it's not as if my past is going further and further away from me. I'm without knowing, kind of recreating it moment by moment. I don't mean to do that, and you don't mean to do that, but that's what we do. And I need to check, and so I've done lots of things to work on that habit, and it's much, much better than it was when David Mitra first met me when I was 25. Generally speaking, I'm not tortured by it like I used to be, but I used to be terribly tortured by it, and I'd be depressed for a long time. I remember going to parties, and I could manage being kind of extrovert and funny at a party, and then I'd just be really depressed. And people just didn't know. I just used to just disappear. Living and working at the London Buddhist Centre all this time, teaching, making friends, practicing the Dharma, being a disciple, all of that has changed that habit. There's still a way to go, to be honest, I'm afraid. But it really has changed that habit. It's taken a long time. It's taken much longer than I would have wished. And I'm sure I could have practiced more intensely. But at that relative level, I have done the work that I've needed to do, and it has changed. Yeah? It's not always good. I still get low moods and can get quite surprised by that. And all sorts of other things. But generally speaking, I've managed to change that habit. And that's at the relative level. Meditating every day, making friends with people, studying the Dharma, being trying to be altruistic, trying to be generous, going beyond my limits, trying to be more courageous, and so on. All of those things are what I've been practicing with the help of my friends for many, many, many years. But that's at the relative level, and that's what we all need to do. But the experience when I saw that was, as it were, at the absolute level. Suddenly, it wasn't like when you see the habit, you're just a sort of a mature version of yourself without that habit. At least in this little moment, I can't replay it because I can't find it again. But in that moment, what arose when I could see through the habit was something beyond self. Something beyond anything I knew, was this exquisite tranquility which you couldn't harm until you liked it, and then it disappeared. As soon as you try to think, and then it goes. So you see, again, there's a sort of the relative work we have to do. We need to go from negative mental states to acknowledging and confessing of negative mental states to cultivating positive mental states. Sila, samadhi, prajna, that's what the teachings say. You practice sila, on the basis of that you practice meditation, samadhi, and then on the basis of that you practice wisdom. That's all at the relative level, and that's essential. And that's what the historical Buddha in this image, for me, represents. The work you need to do. Being mindful, being generous, being courageous, being honest, being able to admit your shortcomings, being able to apologize, all of those things. Unsexy, every day, day in, day out, year in, year out matters. But what arises as a result of that is not just a better version of you, it's something else, as it were, at the absolute level. There's something about your experience which goes beyond you. Yeah. Anyway, that's my way of talking about it. I want to try and start to move towards the end, though. But what I'm trying to say is to see that there's this great matter of a relative work we do, and we all need to do that. I never realized when I was young how much work life demanded of one. How much effort and practice and actually pain that life demanded of one. We tried to get around that by getting a sexy job and feeling wonderful, but it's very, very trivial doing that. Just don't do it. So that you've got that relative work, but then you've got this sort of absolute that appears. And when you get even the tiniest taste of that, like I got a Bach flower remedy drop of it in that meditation, it's like everything you've ever wanted. You feel, even for that tiny moment, like nothing could ever harm you, and that nothing can be harmed even. But that's at the absolute level, the level of absolute reality. Yeah? And in this wonderful sacred image, which I'm still trying to reflect on, relative reality is sitting on the same throne as absolute reality. The historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, born as we are born, is sitting with the timeless absolute Buddha of abundant treasures. But something else then happens. And it's a wonderful moment. And again, if you read these sutras, go slightly sort of Simaima, slightly comic, the whole assembly suddenly thinks, I can't see it. We're down here on the floor. The Buddha's up there in the stupa with abundant treasures, and we can't see them, because we're down here. It's just, I don't know, it's so human. It's like, hang on. This is all very well, but I can't see this, And so the Buddha knows that that's what they're all thinking. They're all thinking that. That I thought was quite striking looking at it again this time. Often it's an individual Buddha or Bodhisattva asks the Buddha something like, can you tell us what's happening? In this instance, they all have the same thought. We want to see Shakyamuni sitting next to abundant treasures in the midst of this giant stupa. We want to see, we yearn to see that. We're desperate to see that. And the Buddha uses his magical power and he draws them all up to his level so they can see into the stupa and see Shakyamuni sitting next to abundant treasures. See history sitting next to myth. See time sitting next to timelessness. See form sitting next to formlessness. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. You have them both. And I was really struck by that on rereading it this time, I hadn't thought of this before, is that the whole community has the same thought. We want to see the Buddha sitting next to abundant treasures. And the Buddha, by his adhisthana, again, lifts them up so that they can see it, can see them. And you see how this is an image for the Sangha, the spiritual community, at its very, very best. This is really the Arya Sangha. They all want to see, it's not just they'd like to, they really yearn to see the Buddha sitting next to abundant treasures on the same lion throne. They yearn to see that. They long to see that. And you see how that's an image of all the community has that one thought, and the Buddha can, as it were, raise them up. So what's striking about that metaphor is you literally cannot see that at the level you're at. That's what it's saying, isn't it? This is Gujarakutta, the Vulture's Peak, the highest mythological place in the Saha world. Even in that high place in the world, you cannot see relative reality sitting on the same throne as absolute reality. You can't see it. You need to be lifted up. And it's very striking to me that they're lifted up as one community, all of whom are having the same thought, so that you're lifted up basically by faith. It's actually an image of inspiration, isn't it? That because they're so inspired, they all rise into the air. And they all rise into the air. By practicing together in that relative way, they really want to see the Buddha next to abundant treasures, and they all rise into the air through their faith, through their inspiration, but as a community. And that's what, in a very clumsy, lumpy, bumpy, not very good way, is what we're trying to do every day on this retreat, and what Buddhism and what Triratna is trying to do, is create a community like that, where we all yearn to see the Buddha, and we yearn to see absolute reality sitting next to relative reality, where you want to see that form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. So final thought, I want to leave you with this image of relative reality, the historical Buddha. If you imagine him in his rag robes, remember we have these pictures of the Buddha, but he always looks grand, but you have to imagine him in these rag robes, and literally robes made from old rags that were stitched together. This human being that has become enlightened. The great mystery of life, Bhante Sangharakshita says, is not enlightenment, but human enlightenment. So there he is, the human Buddha who's become enlightened, sitting next to absolute reality. Absolute reality itself. I want to leave you with that image. And what I want to finish by pointing out is that the temptation is to collapse one into the other. Yeah? So the temptation is to say, for many people, is to say, there's only relative reality. And you can even misunderstand Buddhism as saying there's only relative reality, which means I can get better, kinder, wiser, faster, brighter. I can optimize my life, basically. If you're not careful, Buddhism becomes another kind of self-optimization. I can fix my life, and that's what Buddhism is. It's a kind of self-fix, albeit at a high level. You fix your mind so that you can consume products like everybody else, but not get stressed in doing so. Yeah, and then you can then teach on YouTube about your attainments. Yeah. So this is the temptation is to collapse Buddhism into relative reality, that you just end up with a wise, intelligent, thoughtful person who can work well with society. But that is not Buddhism at all. Yeah. It's something else. It's a weird, degraded, westernized form of Buddhism. Or, actually, you can collapse it the other way. You can say, well, actually, what there really is non-dual awareness, or people are using this language of non-duality a lot. You see a lot of YouTube clips on non-duality. I even have a friend who teaches people to teach non-duality, which seems very dualistic. Anyway, you can have this idea that actually everything is non-dual, that there is only absolute reality, and it cancels relative reality. Do you see what I mean? That there's no path, there's nothing you can do, you just need to, you're in touch with it or not. There's a lot of this now going on in the sort of zeitgeist of Buddhism and Buddhism-like, and particularly things like Advaita Vedanta and all sorts of non-aligned teachers are basically trying to say there's a Buddha of abundant treasures, that's all on the throne. But what we have in the Buddha Dharma, as it's properly understood, is relative reality sitting on the same throne as absolute reality, that you cannot reduce one to the other, that they're both there, and the only way to see that is by the deepest and most profound experience of faith as a spiritual community.